Uh, so welcome and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar in honor of MS Awareness Month presented by the Boston Home Institute and EMD Serono. Our topic is Independence Through Accessibility, Navigating the COVID-19 Pandemic with Assistive Technology. I'm Victoria Stevens, Communications Director, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. I'd like to start out by thanking our sponsors. We have been truly overwhelmed and are deeply grateful for the support we've received throughout the pandemic, and that includes support for today's discussion. While the past year has been extraordinarily challenging, at the Boston Home, the pandemic has also highlighted the incredible partnership that exists between our staff, our residents, and our families to develop positive solutions to improve daily lives. And we're very excited to share that work with you today. Before we get started, I'll just cover a few logistics in the format of today's presentation. We'll be sharing a series of interviews with staff and residents that we've recorded over the past several months with commentary from our presenters. Following the video presentations, we'll open the webinar up to questions and discussions. However, we do ask everyone to stay muted throughout and to use the chat function to submit your questions and comments. I'd like to thank Allie Cahill and Emily Harris. Allie is our Director of Philanthropy and Emily Harris is our Development Coordinator, and they will be helping us with logistics today and also monitoring the chat to share your questions, which we look forward to hearing. So it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Alex Burnham is the Director of the Boston Home Institute and Rehabilitation Services. Corinne Karen is our Assistive Technology Coordinator. Kerry Donahue is our Director of Activities. Julie Jacobs is an occupational therapist. And Nancy, Margaret, and Rich, who are not on screen, are Boston Home residents who shared their experiences in the video interviews that you'll be seeing. I'd also like to thank Mary Beth Road, who is a family member of the Boston Home. We're going to start our video presentations with Nancy and Mary Beth. Nancy had moved to the Boston Home just a few months before the pandemic began. And Nancy and Mary Beth were generous enough to share their experiences as a new Boston Home family, making that transition at such a challenging time. So let's start with their interview. So could you maybe both talk just a little bit about what it was like to move to the Boston Home and what your first impressions were?
Yes, when I first came, I was greeted by wonderful people, and I just, I loved the layout of the Boston Home. It was a very, very friendly place. They showed me around. So I was very excited to get started.
That's great. Now, you both are obviously very close and have a wonderful, loving relationship. So it must have been really hard when COVID did happen and you couldn't immediately be together.
It was very hard. First of all, just not knowing what to expect and what was going to happen and how I was going to feel, and, you know, not to be able to readily get in touch with my sisters was the hardest thing.
Right. We have another sister, our oldest sister. It's Marcia, then Nancy, and then me. And we are very close, and we've always been very close. But I have to say, the Boston Home has been beyond amazing insofar as keeping us together, especially through COVID. Having Nancy have the technological access to being able to learn how to do FaceTime and to be able to do something like this on a Zoom with an iPad that is now attached to her chair. It's just been an amazing experience from that standpoint.
So Nancy, it sounds like you have been really busy learning over the past few months, a lot of new skills.
And it's very exciting because it's something, you know, when I went to school, they just hadn't heard of this and the iPad, and I just talk into it, and, you know, it just fascinates me how easy this technology is that I didn't know about.
So did you have an iPad when you came here, or did you get it because of COVID to help?
Got it because of COVID.
That's great. And it seems like you've done very well, you know, adjusting to it and learning to connect through it.
Oh, I thought it was just great. And, you know, just the fact that you can talk miles away and anything is within your reach. And that's what fascinates me. And it's just so easy. You know, I'm thinking, gee, what did they do before they had something this easy? You know, it was incredible. You know, now you just get on the pad and sign in and that's it. It's just incredibly great.
It's nice to be able to see you.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, Mary Beth, I was just thinking it must have given you peace of mind to be able to really see Nancy and have a face-to-face conversation, even if it was virtual.
Very, very much so. And it just adds that different dimension from a phone call, because of course we would talk by phone, as in my other sister Marcia as well, but it's just different when you're able to see someone. It just changes the dynamic of the conversation, and you just have a closer feeling than you do on the phone, knowing that she was there and she was safe, and you guys did such an amazing job just keeping people safe during COVID. It was a huge weight off of us as, you know, sisters and siblings and family and caretakers, and, you know, wanting to make sure she had that care.
So while we were talking with Nancy and Mary Beth, we were fortunate that Kim Davis, who is part of our rehabilitation team, she's a physical therapist and assistive technology professional who specializes in seating and mobility, actually came in for her regular session to work with Nancy on driving her power chair. So we had the chance to talk a little bit about Nancy's experience with that as well, which I'll share now.
They've taken advantage of COVID to have Nancy take her driving lessons and get used to the electric wheelchair. She didn't have one for a while when she was first there. So I think the use of time, seeing that there's so much of it during a day now, has been put to good use.
Yeah. Go Nancy. Go girl. Woo! Yeah. Foxy Nancy. You got the best. All right. Great job. Nancy, you go girl.
So we're still in process. She doesn't quite have her driver's license yet.
She's got a learner's permit?
Yes.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most challenging part of learning to drive the power chair? Because it's something most people have never done, you know?
You know, actually, I have been practicing through my physical therapy from time to time how to move my fingers on different keys. And I first started learning this on the typewriter, and so I can decide where to move my fingers and trying to make see if I can remember where the keys are, and to easily touch the remote keys on my wheelchair. And
So you're good. She has I don't know, about 4 buttons that she needs to do regularly, and she does the on-off button really well. And that when we were practicing switching between, she has a power seating system. She has power tilt, so she had to push a button to go between driving and power tilt. But you're learning how to always stop in a timely manner is the last thing. So to make sure she's safe. She has toe guards so that if she bumps something with the front of the foot plates, her toes are protected, as long as she doesn't really bump.
That's good.
So just releasing the joystick in a timely manner to make sure she's safe to avoid obstacles. She's done fabulous learning to drive in the hallways, through doorways, on off the elevator. That's
I have to also say though, I think, you know, especially with Nancy's spasticity, it's been remarkable that she is able to do this. And the fact that they have done the 3D joystick for her based upon the way her hand functions is just amazing. So it's not just giving her lessons and putting her in the chair. People have really spent the time to see how her body is working, and it's that extra step that I think makes Boston Home Boston Home. And the fact that she isn't driving yet, that it isn't just something that you're allowed to do when you can figure out how to start and stop or turn it on and off. I mean, everything is done with such care and precision, and with the community and the resident first and foremost. And that's what struck Marcia and I actually when we visited last July.
So I think Mary Beth may be on the call with us today. So if you are, thank you, Mary Beth, so much for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate it. And Corinne, Mary Beth mentioned briefly in the video that you had created a 3D joystick with the 3D printer in the Wheelchair Enhancement Center for Nancy. Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So every wheelchair comes with kind of this standard joystick, and the joystick itself is what it is, but it comes with this topper that, you know, you kind of use almost like a video game topper. Unfortunately, with our residents, a lot of them don't have the hand mobility to grab onto this. So we work specifically with each resident to come up with a design, and I design it and I print it out on the 3D printer, and we see what works. A couple of them that I have here looks like this. So it goes right on top of the joystick like that, and they can grasp onto it, you know, be able to hold on to it more and have better control of their chair. Some of them just like little ones with a little ridge on it so that they can get better grip on it. We've done things like this where their hand can just kind of sit on it. And what Nancy ended up using was kind of just looks like this, almost a golf ball shape. And that was what worked for her. We tried several different iterations of a joystick topper, and this is what she went with, and this is what she's doing best with. This is how she's staying safe when she's driving. She's able to take her hand off of this joystick topper, and hopefully we'll get her driving her license very, very soon.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing that you're able to work with each resident individually to really customize a solution for them. And I know this webinar focuses on residents of the Boston Home, but I believe you work sometimes with outpatients as well to help them with these kinds of customizations.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here in the Wheelchair Enhancement Center, which is what you see in the background here, it's a pretty extensive machine shop. I have any kind of machine you'd ever need or want, and including 2 3D printers that are, you know, not just your simple one you can get on Amazon. They're pretty industrial, and we can do, you know, lots of different customizations with it. So most wheelchairs just come just like a car, very standard. And if you want anything extra, it costs money. And we all know what insurance is like and everything like that. So having the ability to make anything custom that we need for our residents is just, it's life-changing for a lot of people. And outpatients as well, they can come in, we can assess them, see what they need, and, you know, then keep them safe in their own homes and in their communities for as long as possible, because that's, you know, everybody's goal is to stay in their own home. And if they're unable to drive their wheelchair, not necessarily with just the joystick topper, but the speed and the length of the wheelchair keeps hitting the walls, we do whatever we can to help everybody.
Well, that's fantastic. And that actually really leads us into our next presentation segment, which is that the Boston Home in many ways was so fortunate that we were well positioned to get residents like Nancy up and running with assistive technology quickly when the pandemic occurred, because it's always been a priority at the Boston Home. So our next presenter is Alex Burnham, who is the director of the Boston Home Institute and Rehabilitation Services. And he's going to talk about assistive technology long-term at the Boston Home.
Assistive technology has been part of the Boston Homes mission for decades now, even in its most rudimentary forms. The population that we work with primarily has advanced multiple sclerosis, but other residents that we have other neurological conditions, which often lead to severe motor impairments. So say, for example, they might not just be paralyzed from the waist down. They may have weakness in one or both of their arms. They may have some difficulty with breath control. So trying to project their voice for speech recognition might be very difficult without, say, a microphone and loudspeaker, or without using other strategies to help project their voice a little bit more consistently towards the device. Other people may have bad tremors. So even though they have a lot of movement, it's not movement that they can functionally use. So we may have to look at using something that is more of a switch-based access. So in other words, if they can rest their hand on something and slowly control one or two switches, that might be more under their ability to operate than, say, using a wide array, an entire keyboard, or directly contacting a touch screen. We've always tried to find a way to provide some hope over hardship for people to be able to recognize what their abilities are and not focus on their disabilities, especially in this environment here. This is a residential community of individuals who are all going through a life-altering neurological process, and it's very important that we give them that vocational capacity to complete the work of daily life as much as they would like to be doing on their own, with as much supplementation as we can provide.
I'm going to pause just there for a moment and also encourage everyone, please do go ahead and submit your questions or comments at any time, although we're going to save them for the end. Feel free to send them along as we're moving through the presentations. So Alex, thank you for that and for talking a little bit about assistive technology as it existed before COVID at the Boston Home. And in our next segment, Alex speaks to how we were able to shift gears, or how we needed to shift gears to be able to make the necessary changes when COVID occurred.
I think we realized that communication with the outside world is going to be paramount for our residents, for our staff, to ensure that they have all the information that they would need to keep their family safe. And certainly if any of us think back to when COVID first started, there was such an aura of uncertainty about when was it going to come into this building, what was going to happen if somebody or multiple residents caught it. So there was definitely the external drive as well from the families to keep in touch, especially for those who have been part of our Boston Home family for many years, visiting on a regular basis, being part of the daily routine for so many of the residents. So we really felt that having some sort of stronger connection for the residents to be able to reach the outside world was critically important. Fortunately, we've come to a place with mainstream technology where we had the ability to procure a number of different devices. Now we have tablet technology, we have screens and other calling interfaces such as the Amazon Echo products. We have the ability for people to use smartphones, both for voice and video communication with family. And we were able to leverage that ability to ask for mainstream technology that people already own or may have access to, or would even be able to donate through our online accounts for the Boston Home, to be able to implement it very quickly for the residents too. When we first identified that we were going to have to open an isolation unit for those residents who were exposed or tested positive for COVID, we recognized there was going to be another layer of isolation for the residents, being out of their usual space and being even more sealed off. So we were able to bring some of the technology and have our assistive technology specialist, Corinne, create a number of quick but easily cleanable mounts so that we could bring that technology into the quarantine unit, the special care unit, and make sure that at that incredibly critical time where families wanted to be able to connect directly with the residents, that was still able to happen.
Thank you, Alex. And I know some people on the call may be familiar, but I would also point out that there was a huge logistical effort in terms of supporting residents as our spaces had to change during the pandemic. So I don't know if you want to talk briefly about the Cyber Cafe and just what that is like and how you worked to sort of branch out from that space into individual rooms, or we can save that for the question and answer if you prefer.
Sure. No, I can speak briefly to that. So those of you who have been part of the Boston Home community for the past 15 years are familiar that we have a dedicated computer lab on the second floor that actually ended up being subsumed as part of the special care unit because of the need to have an isolated nurses station to care for the residents who were in the second floor dining room and actually in the rehab gym. However, we recognized that we could redeploy the workstations that we had in the Cyber Cafe, A, to make more space, but B, to bring them individually to residents who were avid users of the technology in the Cyber Cafe. And so as we closed the special care unit and have received some additional grant money and donations, we've been able to overhaul the Cyber Cafe and bring in new workstations while still allowing those residents who had the previous workstation set up in their individual rooms to continue accessing email, Skype, Zoom, any other interface that they use for communication. We've been able to support both formats, public as well as individual rooms, for the residents to continue accessing the technology.
That's fantastic. And I think we have some photographs of those individual room setups that we can share later in the presentation. So Corinne, with respect to the quarantine period of COVID, in the next video segment, which we recorded in the Wheelchair Enhancement Center with you, we are looking at ways that you help to support residents to be as independent as possible during the time that they were a little bit more isolated in their rooms during quarantine. And I know that you mentioned in your video the don and doff procedures. So just for folks who were not here and didn't necessarily know what it entailed for a staff person to go from one resident's room to the next, could you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Absolutely. In the video, I speak about donning and doffing PPE, which is kind of just the technical term for putting on and taking off. To don is to put on, and to doff is to take off. Because of the pandemic and all the changes we had to go through every day, nobody knew what they were walking into in any particular room. So PPE, or personal protective equipment, masks, goggles, gowns were necessary. They were extremely important, but they are very time consuming to don and doff, or take on and take off. So just to walk into a resident's room to pick up a pencil that they dropped required 5 minutes of putting on a new gown, washing your hands, putting on a N95 mask, putting on appropriate goggles. It was very time consuming, but 100% necessary. So anything that we could do to limit the amount of times that staff needed to go into a resident room was huge. We were asking residents not to leave their rooms. So if a resident needed something, just, coming out of their room and asking for help, we were asking them not to do that. So it brought up some challenges.
And I know that you found some great solutions as well. So this is an interview with Corinne and Margaret, who's one of our residents who's very independent.
Hi, my name's Corinne. This is Margaret. Margaret's has been a resident here for a long time. I am the Assistive Technology Coordinator. So we had a lot of fun during COVID trying to come up with different ways that people could get through it. One way is we were asking the residents to stay in their rooms a lot. And Margaret's very independent, likes to do a lot of things. So we were able to go off of a donated chair and find seat elevate or seat lift, which is normally not covered by insurance for somebody that's in a nursing facility, because the insurance is saying, well, you have somebody there 24 hours a day to reach for something, which is true most of the time, and it was still true during COVID. But the fact that all of the work it took just to go into a room and to leave a room with all the PPE, having Margaret be able to do it on her own was great for everybody, for herself, for her independence, and for the staff to not have to don and doff all that PPE to get into a room. So without having to have a staff member come in and gowned up in all their PPE and don and doff their PPE, Margaret was able to use her Elevate. So go ahead and show them what Seat Elevate does. So it lifts her up to be higher so that she can reach things that maybe she wouldn't be able to reach in her wheelchair. So instead of having to call for help, she was able to do more independently while they were kind of quarantined in their rooms. Yes. It was a game changer. All right. So one of the other things that we were able to do for Margaret, and again, was when she was in bed, she was able to use just kind of your standard call light, you would have at any hospital or nursing home, where you're in bed and you can activate your call light. Unfortunately, when you're out of the bed, it's a little bit more difficult to access. Usually the staff lays it on the bed or anything like that, and Margaret would be able to leave her room and say, I need some help with this, I need some help with that. But again, when we were asking them to stay in their rooms, we built with the 3D printer this button right here, and it goes into the same jack as your normal call light, but it could go beside her bed. And so when she was in bed, pretending she was in bed, it could go over here so she could use it. And then when she was out of bed, we could kind of move it wherever she needed it in the room so she'd be able to access it while she's out of bed and ask for help without leaving her room.
Thank you, Corinne. I think everybody who goes into the Wheelchair Enhancement Center usually agrees that you have one of the coolest jobs at the Boston Home. So thank you for sharing that. And Margaret also just wanted to share a functional tool on her iPad that she has found very helpful. So this is Margaret demonstrating her voice control.
One of the features we found, it's called voice control, and it allows you to use your voice to operate with iPad. So you just go into accessibility and scroll down until you see voice control, and then click on it and turn it on. And then when you go to the regular screen, there are numbers by using the number. So, for example, I could open my Alexa app by saying 12. 12. And as she continues with the numbers on that. So it really does make it so much easier to use.
So just before we move on to our next segment, I don't know if any of you might like to speak to the number system and why that's easier for residents to use as opposed to just sort of saying, Alexa. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
I can take that one.
Thanks, Alex.
So there's a couple of different ways that people can operate iOS using their voice or using speech recognition. I think most of us are familiar with the use of Siri, which is one way to get the device to open an app or send a quick text message or perform some other routine like playing music. But in the past couple of iterations of iOS, they've expanded to add what's called the voice control feature that Margaret was pointing out, where an individual can have an array of numbers displayed on the screen, and it gives us it gives the person a chance to select by number without having to say open Google Chrome or open whatever the name of the app is. They can just simply say the number, and it will either open that number or create a grid that the person can then continue to use by number to select a particular point on the screen. So it makes the commands shorter for people who have breath support or voice control problems. And it also gives the individual much more granular control over individual features in the apps, because Siri often won't respond to specific commands to function within the apps, like pausing music or rewinding or checking a new playlist, something like that.
Great, thank you so much for expanding on that.
And one of the things with that numbers and grids, a lot of residents were hesitant to use it before COVID. They really liked to be able to use other features, use their hands to access what they needed to. But during COVID, we found that a lot of residents were more willing to look into systems such as that, as opposed to kind of being hesitant about it or saying, no, I can do it, no, I can do it. COVID really opened a lot of people's minds to try other things.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Corinne, because our next segment with Julie Jacobs, occupational therapist, actually focuses on one of our residents, Rich, who was not interested in using technology really at all before the pandemic, I believe. So we'll share that quickly. And then Julie, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
Hey Siri, FaceTime with
So that's just a very brief video showing Julie assisting Rich with his custom iPad mount and using his voice to connect. So Julie, can you talk a little bit about your work with Rich?
Sure. So Rich and I worked together earlier on in the pandemic on getting this iPad set up for him. Rich, he really enjoys watching movies and listening to music. He's also a comedian, so he's very interested in comedy. And I also thought it could just be a really great tool for him to stay connected with his family and friends. So because Rich has MS and he has severe ataxia of his upper extremities, he's unable to use them functionally to access an iPad in a more standard way because he's unable to coordinate his movements. So if he's trying to, reach for a target on the iPad, it's not only incredibly challenging, but it also can be incredibly frustrating for him. So we needed to find an alternative way for him to access it. So with Rich, we also ended up setting up voice control and also Hey Siri. So he kind of uses a combination of both of these features so that he's able to access it hands-free. So like Alex touched on with voice control, there are different ways you can set it up. With Rich, we also did use the number overlay feature. So that way he was able to kind of just visually identify the number that's associated with the icon that he wants to activate. And then he's able to just say that number instead of having to physically touch the screen. So this worked really well for him. We also worked closely with Corinne on designing a mount system for the iPad to make sure that it was in a good position for him so that it's visible, also close enough to his face so that, the device is able to detect his voice commands. And as you can see from that clip, it's very easy for caregivers to just place the mount in and out. as he wants, and he's able to direct caregivers on that as well. So we spent time getting it set up for him initially, and then reviewing the different voice commands and how to navigate the device. So it was really neat because he's able to use it pretty comprehensively using just his voice. So it makes it a lot easier for him. And this has been really nice to see, just because pre-pandemic, I had approached Rich about accessing an iPad or technology, and he really wasn't so interested in it. I think he was really reluctant. I think maybe because it's new technology, unfamiliar to him. It could have been a little intimidating. So at that point, he just was really reluctant. So it's really nice to see how often he's using it now. I'd go into his room and pretty consistently he'd be FaceTiming his significant other, or I'd catch him watching Netflix or listening to music. So he's really embraced it, which is really, really neat. And it's also just great because there's, I think, one of the maybe few positive things to come from the pandemic could be this new interest and willingness of certain residents at the Boston home to try this technology and kind of see what it has to offer. And I think while assistive technology has obviously been so critical at the Boston home always, the pandemic has really reinforced just how crucial it is. And it's really helped kind of our residents remain connected with the outside world and also just really engaged.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I know I'll just add as an aside that during the pandemic, actually before the pandemic in the fall, we had our comedy night. It was one of our last big events before the pandemic hit, and Rich had performed. As Julie mentioned, he's a professional comedian. And during the pandemic, our sponsors for this event, EMD Serono, actually reached out to us and asked to have him record a comedy set, which they shared as part of their virtual workplace training for all of their employees who are working at home. So it was pretty fantastic that he was able to participate in that as well. So I think in our next segment, Alex, is our slides of setups that were in individual residents' rooms. And I think one of the nice things about this feature is really seeing, which we've already touched on today, how customized every solution is. That each resident has very different needs. So the rehabilitation and assistive technology staff are really able to find a solution that works well for that individual. So we can take a look through those.
And while Vicky's setting that up, I can just tell a little bit about our general philosophy is to make any of these technologies accessible to our residents based on what their strengths are. But we also want to make them relatively foolproof for any person who's providing care to be able to help the individual set up, charge, or even do some basic troubleshooting with devices. So a couple of things that have been really helpful for us have been able to use more mainstream technology because individuals are familiar with them from their own personal life. It's not necessarily a device we had to get from a specialized catalog or manufacturer. It's things like iPads and Android devices. And as you can see with this first gentleman, Mr. President here, we have a very simple $40 voice amplifier that a tour guide might use from Amazon. But when he's talking with his family remotely on FaceTime, using the microphone to capture his quiet voice and projecting it louder, it makes all the difference in people hearing him. Corinne was able to make a 3D printed mount that faces forward on his left armrest. So that way it is facing the individual with whom he's speaking. And he uses this in daily conversation as well as on FaceTime chats with his family. Okay. So on the next one, this is a little bit busy, and I hope it's not an electrical code violation, but we do have to get a lot of plugs into a very small space. The Boston home did upgrade the electrical service a few years ago in anticipation of more individuals bringing devices that would need to be plugged in. We also had an upgrade to our Wi-Fi during the pandemic, early last fall, to be able to accommodate the amount of streaming and wirelessly connected devices that we were seeing with the residents here. So this is an example of an accommodation that's been made. On the right side, there's an Echo Show. I think it's a little 5-inch screen, but it operates on the same Alexa platform that most Echo devices do. So for this individual, it was right at her eye level so that she could drive up to it, interact with the screen and get the video feedback as well as the typical Alexa response as it's mounted on her wall. But we also made sure that we had additional ports available. So on the left side to charge her iPad, which she would bring with her, to be able to charge her phone and other devices with a multi-port charger. So taking advantage of a very small piece of real estate, but making it as technology centric as possible. I think on the next one here, we have an example that we recently set up for an individual in her room as an iPad kiosk. So this is for somebody who has significant difficulty with tremors in her arms. So touching the screen is going to be very difficult for her. She is a very literate computer user. She previously came up to the Cyber Cafe on a regular basis, and we did set up previously one of those workstations for her, but she was interested in moving into 21st century technology. So we're able to create a desk mounted kiosk for her to be able to go up to. And she does have a Bluetooth keyboard for those elements that she wants to type. But for the most part, she's been sending text messages with her family by using the Siri speech recognition interface, and she's able to do FaceTime, and she's able to look up some basic information there as well too. We have a robust graduate student program that we were able, per state guidelines, to restart last fall. So helping her out there was one of our graduate student clinicians from Northeastern, helping her acquire access with technology she had never touched before the pandemic. And on the next one, I think we have an individual who has a setup that she was using prior to the pandemic, and we've sort of, again, condensed it down. This is a workstation that previously was in the Cyber Cafe for a woman who is only able to use speech recognition for controlling computerized devices. She is fully paralyzed, and she is very good about being able to control devices, either a computer by Dragon Naturally Speaking software. She does a lot of information about she downloads books from the Boston Public Library, and she wants to listen to them that way on the Overdrive interface that can be loaded onto a PC. You see on the right side, we also have a couple of, she also has a small Echo Dot, so she can use that to control a couple of smart plugs in her room. And I think she's also upgraded, and Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, to the Fire Cube. So now with the newer cable boxes that were just installed last fall as well too, with digital cable, we have the capacity for her to be using speech recognition to operate her TV remote. So she's got, again, a lot of speech recognition technology, including the boom mic on the left side that is positioned right where she would drive up to it in her chair. So that way she doesn't have to have somebody adjust it for her. Everything is sort of set right where she can get to it to be able to navigate around her room and control as much in her room as possible.
That was just one more setup.
And here we see another example of mounting an Echo Dot using a 3D printed model that Corinne helped us out with on a gooseneck stand mounted to the wall. So this could be somebody who had difficulty with turning her head to project her voice at the device, but she wanted to make sure that she was able to access it from bed as well as when she was up in the chair. So this gave the staff the ability just to swivel, not move it around the room, keep it plugged in, keep it operational the entire time, but swivel it towards her when she would be lying in bed, and then swivel away to a spot where she tended to be sitting in her wheelchair throughout the day, especially during those quarantine times where she really wasn't able to leave her room really for much of anything. So she was still able to use her iPad, but also have access to this for music or for other news or information that might be a little bit harder for her to navigate around on her iPad to find.
Great, thank you. And I think for our last video presentation, we have an interview with Edna, who's the resident that Alex mentioned, who enjoys downloading books from Boston Public Library using just her voice control. And this interview was actually recorded before COVID, but as Alex mentioned, the team was able to move that entire setup into Edna's room so that she can continue to do that. And this video just talks about how much that access means to her.
Because I can no longer use my hands, I couldn't use my tablet because I would download books from the Boston Public Library, an ebook. So I couldn't read. But when I came here, they were able to set up one of the computers in the cyber cafe with Dragon speech recognition. So I was able to at least get on and log in. And one of the physical occupational therapists helped me load Overdrive, which gets the books. You can read it, it's like Kindle. And she set it up that I can go on, go to Overdrive, my Boston Public Library account comes right up, and then you choose what you want. I just click download, and the book comes in. I have it for 2 weeks, and I just return it. It's just like a regular library. It has been, for me, a godsend, because I love to read, and now I can.
So thank you, Alex, for walking us through those. And Carrie, to turn it to you, I know once the residents have their communication devices and they have a setup that works for them, there's still a tremendous amount of coordination that the activities team supports in terms of day-to-day communication and events and programs. Can you speak to that? Oh, you're on mute, Carrie.
Thank you, Vicki. The pandemic was really a shock to the Boston Home community style of living, not only for the Boston Home residents and for the staff, but also for the families. There was a lot of changing parts and it was constant. And we really had to come up with a system that gave the communication quickly and efficiently to all parties right at the beginning, and then let them know that we were going to be there for them and to, you know, have patience, but we were going to figure it all out. And I really can't thank the staff, the families, and the residents for just really their resilience and their resolve through this whole thing. Like we've talked about, just learning new technology. We really jumped in and got everyone's emails at the beginning to just say, let's create some real strong email lists so we can send things out in real time as things are changing. So our residents' families were notified of all the things that were happening COVID related and all the opportunities that we had to be able to deploy iPads and to get FaceTime going, or WeChat, Zoom, Facebook Messenger. There was really no system that we weren't going to use to try to connect families with their loved ones. And early on in the pandemic, we went through Easter, we went through Mother's Day. Those were really tough, challenging days, and our staff really just pulled through to get everyone connected and being able to speak with one another. I remember being up in that COVID unit and connecting mother and daughter on Mother's Day with a device, having to take on the PPE, but really making sure that we did all those connections. We also made sure that we connected the residents themselves to each other. And when everyone had the iPads deployed to their rooms, we were able to do trivia and get a FaceTime group chat going on. And what we really noticed, what was really shocking that I don't think a lot of us had thought about, was not only were they missing their family, but the residents themselves are family to one another. So when you had a screen similar to this and you had 6 or 7 residents on playing trivia, the recognition of, oh, my friend that I haven't seen because they were staying in their room, really became eye-opening. They missed each other. They just really missed that connection with one another, knowing each other were safe. So when we had a virtual concert or something else going on, a lot of the early on in the program just became reacquainting each other and saying hello, greeting one another. It was just really nice to be able to offer those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, the activities team just went above and beyond, both in person and using the technology features to keep that human element. I mean, that's really what the technology is serving, is keeping those human connections. So thank you. Do you want to talk at all about some of the religious services, or, activities is usually booming with activities and concerts and art class and things like that. Do you want to speak at all to how you were able to take some of that online?
Sure. So I know that we have a minister here, Jeff Johnson, and he was able to come into the Boston home, and we were able to help set him up in the activity room on a Zoom. And we were able to go, we have 5, 6 iPads in the department. So for residents who didn't have an iPad in their room, we were able to go up to their room and deploy those iPads for programs that they would like. So we were able to have religious services. We had a Seder dinner virtually for our Jewish residents during the pandemic last year during Passover. We've had Protestant service. We've gotten together to just pray together in various ways on Zoom. Resident council is very important to the residents to be able to, and more so during COVID, to kind of say, hey, this is how we're feeling. We need some more updates and would like to have this option. So having resident council go online and go on Zoom was really important. So we organized that program. We had Boston Celebrity Series and Milton Academy were real good partners for us. And they offered some really great concerts that we were able to showcase on Zoom. We were able to send out emails of concerts on YouTube and other programs that the residents could access on their iPads. So there was lots of that stuff going on.
Thank you, Carrie. That's fantastic. And I know that with some of those performances that I was able to join in on, it was one of those silver linings of COVID that not only were the residents able to watch the performance, but they actually could converse face to face with some of the performers as well, which they probably wouldn't normally get to do with the performance. So thank you, Ellie. I know we're getting a little bit short on time, and it looks like we have quite a few questions. Do you want to lead us through some of the questions, Ellie?
Sure, I would love to. So one of our first questions is regarding the Wheelchair Enhancement Center. Can you confirm the payer source? Is it a private pay, extra cost for patients, both inpatient and outpatient? Corinne, can you answer that, please?
Yes. So for our residents or inpatients, it's at no extra cost unless there's something very specific piece of equipment that they want to use specifically. It's funded through grants and through our endowment, and there's no cost for any of our services for inpatients. Our Wheelchair Enhancement Center for outpatients is done on a pay scale through their income, and it's discussed thoroughly with the client beforehand.
Great, thank you, Corinne.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is, do the residents also use technology to communicate with staff?
So I'll take that one again. Yes, so we talked a lot about voice activation and Siri and things like that. But we do have some residents here that don't have a voice. They're unable to project their voice. If you've been around them a long time, you can usually get what they're saying. But if you're newer or if they're having a tough day, it's really hard to understand. So there are systems out there that will allow you to type on a keyboard by just hitting one switch. Again, if your arms or hands don't work, it's impossible to do that. So we've devised items like this, so it would get mounted on the back of their wheelchair, and they'd be able to, a lot of our residents hit it with their chin. They're unable to touch the keyboard, so what it does is it scrolls across and they hit it, and it highlights a few letters, and then they hit it again to get to what letter they want, and the iPad speaks it out for the staff. So for a few of our residents that don't have a voice, this technology is extremely useful.
Great, thank you. Another question is, do you provide technology support for outpatients to learn how to use the different types of technology?
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. So we do have outpatient physical, occupational, and speech therapy services, and we do have the ability to provide service to people, usually billed through their insurance, to support assistive technology. There are billing codes that look at assistive technology, and especially through the lens of whatever the person needs. Certainly for physical therapy, it's going to mostly be related to wheeled mobility, so wheelchair modifications, repairs, as well as customizing a brand new seating system for somebody. For occupational therapy, it might be looking at somebody who's acquiring skills with needing to modify a piece of mainstream technology, or perhaps looking at some other way of modify or using a modified interface to engage, like maybe a dual switch adapter to interact with an iPad. And for speech, it might be somebody who's getting more progressively difficult to understand. So they might be looking at communication technology that will supplement or replace spoken word. But yes, we do see people on an outpatient basis, and even currently, despite the restrictions, have been able to do that in a safe manner as well.
If I can just jump in for a quick addition, this might be a good opportunity to add that if anyone who's on the webinar is interested in more information about a specific topic, or would like to maybe see a designated webinar around training, or sharing around a particular interest, you can put that in the chat, and we're definitely looking for those suggestions. So thank you.
Corinne, I know you just gave some examples about hands-free technology. Could you give a couple examples of how people without a voice can access technology?
So a lot of things we do is switch access. A lot of 3D printing materials. Let me see, I have one right here on my desk. That makes just a simple button a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to use, with not needing as much force as with a regular button like this that takes some force to push down. And with the lock line, as I showed you with the other, we can position it in any way that they can use it. So if they can use their head, or if they, some residents just push it with their elbow. So anything we can do to allow them access to a switch gives them infinite possibilities to do things. As long as they can hit a switch with some part of their body, we can make it so that they can basically do anything on an iPad or technology like that.
Great, thank you. Another question is, how can families with permission keep an eye on a resident if they are not well? Can they have a camera be turned on?
So I think cameras become tricky. There's a lot of HIPAA violation and privacy that we have to look into. So we wouldn't just be looking to have anyone have a camera set up in a room. Lots of our residents have roommates, so we can't have cameras on all the time. However, for instance, we have one family member who was here visiting every day before the pandemic. They were always here. And it was hard for the family to adjust to not being able to see their relative. But every day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, my staff goes up to the residence room and FaceTimes with the family. So they're able to connect. She's able to see her. She's able to know how she's doing. And then she can ask the team if there's something that she wants to refer back to the nursing department or the therapy department. If something doesn't feel right, we can help with that communication. So families were really connecting with us in the activity department to help us say, hey, we have some concern about our relative. Could you go up and check on them and get the FaceTime going or a Zoom call so we can all connect with one another? And that's really how we manage a lot of that worry and fear that was happening.
Thank you, Carrie.
Ali, can I just make a quick, before we jump to the next question, I know it's nearly 1 o'clock, so before losing the opportunity, I did just want to thank everyone and say we are so proud of the work that happens here every day, and I'm happy to be able to share that today. And also for many of you who are on the call as participants, I know that many of you are our core supporters who really make this work possible. So thank you all for being here today. It means so much to us to have your support. So thanks, Ali. I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to share that.
Of course. So it looks like we have one more question. It is, how can family members of residents work with the assistive technology team to set up some of these opportunities for their loved one/resident?
I would really just say to reach out to any one of the members that you see here on the screen, or anyone, their nurse manager. We're really great about forwarding those requests on. We have a really great internal system that connects us with our work orders that can really just connect all the team, and we'll know how to deploy someone to help that situation and individual.
And I would just add, that everyone who's on the webinar will be getting a follow-up email with an opportunity to comment or to share feedback. And also if you have follow-up questions or you wanted to direct you to a particular member of the team or something that was mentioned here. So that will go out later today, and feel free to take advantage of it. And we'll try to put you in touch with the person who can help.
Yeah, it's definitely a team effort. And this kind of goes to the next question to as well, is a lot of times I joke around with the residents, the newer residents, that they're the brains and I'm the brawn. You know, it's the question is, where did you learn to make these modifications? It's all through the input of the therapy department. They decide, they look at the residents' abilities and see what will be able to keep them independent, and then discuss it with me. And I, you know, will design something specifically. The RESNA website could be something that you could look at. It's RESNA, and that does all the certifications for the ATPs, Adaptive Technology.
Great, thank you, Corinne.
Thank you all. I think we're at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to stop there. But thank you again for all of your participation and support. And again, we just want to thank our sponsors for their support as well. We couldn't do it without the financial support that makes all of this possible. So thank you. This was our first webinar, and we look forward to hoping you'll join us again in the future. So thanks so much, everyone.